structure this, how much background information you're going to have to put in, the level of detail and complexity, that's all going to be dependent, right? So, you know, the topic, whatever it is you're writing about, the new device, the new technique, the new results, why are you trying to tell me this, and who are you telling this to? Whom are you telling this to, right? All that impacts what it is you're going to do, and that's what drives your content. That's why wordiness is this one-to-one ratio. If your audience needs to know it, your audience needs to know it. And you can't cut it out because, and most of the time you say you can't put it in there because it's hard to write, and it's hard to explain. But you can't leave that out because your audience needs to know that. So that's what kind of determines and drives whatever it is you're going to do. And essentially, this is what the structure falls into. Okay, this is kind of basically the overall way we handle this. Is you have an introduction, and I've stuck the lit review in the introduction. Sometimes the literature review is a whole separate section, and you have an introduction, and then you have a literature review. That's one of the optional ways or other ways of structuring this. Then you have a section on methodology. Then you have a section on results. Then you have discussion. Sometimes the results and the discussion are together. If you have got, say, for example, results that are sequential, meaning that you've got these results, and then based on whatever they are, then you did this next step. And if the results had been different, you would have gone a different direction, right? Sometimes if it becomes sequential like that, and one impacts the next step in analyzing these results, you would put the results and the discussion together. Then we have this concluding section, and that usually talks about the significance, the impact, the conclusions that you're drawing from your research, and future work. Forgot to put that down there. And again, sometimes these headings are different. Sometimes this is all one heading. Sometimes you have got conclusions, and then you have another heading that says impact or significance in future work. I mean, these are the basic ideas that you're kind of working with. All right, have you found this to be true in what you've read? And one of the things I was kind of looking for when I was asking you how you saw these differences was, have you noticed that this is essentially chronological? Yes, no. And that's one of the big differences from it being not a research paper. A research paper is not as chronologically structured as a journal article is. All right, now let me explain what I mean by that. Personally, I am fighting a losing battle here, and I realize that. I do not think that introduction and conclusion work very well as headings. Well, because all they say is, here's the beginning and here's the ending. I can see that by looking. When you put introduction above the first sentence of whatever it is you're writing, what else is it but your introduction? So as a reader, you aren't giving me any guidance. You aren't giving me a signpost that lets me know what the introduction does. What is the purpose of your introduction? Is it context? Is it background information? Is it definition of the problem and scope? Right? All of those are introductory, correct? They're the background kind of information, and it gives me as a reader a much better idea of what the purpose of your introduction is than when you put introduction above your first word. I also think from the point of view of a writer, well, have you all found when you've written, introductions and conclusions are the hardest part. Once you get yourselves in the body, things kind of roll right along, right? I mean, no matter what you're writing, if you're writing a research paper, once you get past the beginning and you get into the body of what you're doing, things kind of roll right along, right? You kind of get on a roll, and things kind of work out. And then you get done with that, and then you have a hard time ending, right? I mean, what do I do? I've now said everything I have to say. How do I actually complete or conclude this? So, for the most part, introductions and conclusions are the hardest part, especially introductions, because you've got to get over this inertia. I mean, you haven't even started yet, right? And so you're just kind of sitting there staring at this blank computer screen or this blank page, and there's a certain inertia there that you've got to actually get started, and it's so overwhelming. So what happens when we start constructing an introduction, too, is that as a writer, we're unfocused. Because we haven't written this whole thing yet, so we have no idea where we're going, so how can we introduce it very effectively? Because we're kind of just sitting here with everything we know swimming around in our heads. And when you just put the word introduction on top of that first word, you aren't giving yourself any focus either. It's easy to type introduction. It's much more difficult to know what to do after you type in that word. And if you stop to think about what the purpose of this introduction is, what you want to accomplish in it, and you come up with a much more precise heading for that particular section, you've also helped yourself, because you've begun thinking about what it needs to do. Does that make sense? And like I said, it may be that you can put another title up there for yourself, and the journal is going to expect introduction, or your teacher is going to expect introduction. And I mean, that's fine. But by thinking about what you really think the purpose of this is, it helps you start gathering your thoughts together rather than just saying, okay, here's an introduction. Now what do I do? I find the same thing is true with conclusion. Conclusion is where this ends. I mean, of course you're going to end somewhere. And when you put conclusion up there and it's in front of the last 2 or 3 paragraphs or the last couple of pages, you're telling me this is the ending. Well, I can also tell that by looking, right? You're going to end somewhere. What's the purpose of your conclusion? What do you need to do in this conclusion to actually round out what you've done? So things like significance, impact, conclusions with an S, right? That's very different from conclusion. Right? I mean, that means you're drawing some kind of conclusions. Your recommendations, future work, all of those are much more specific, and they kind of give you a better idea of what it is you're trying to do to round this out. How many of you think a conclusion summarizes? Good, none of you do, because it probably doesn't. I mean, a summary is probably not how you're going to conclude. When people start thinking of research papers, I can't tell you the number that I have read on multiple levels that end with, at some point, I get in summary or in conclusion. All of a sudden they stop, and I get in summary, and wow, is that ever a big break in what we're doing, right? I mean, you probably don't want to just summarize. You want to keep moving your development forward. Everything you write should carry the reader further into your topic. You shouldn't be going a little bit and then backing up a little bit and then going a little bit forward and then backing up and then going a little forward. All of this should be moving whatever you're saying forward, a one-to-one correspondence. Every word adds more information. It doesn't repeat old information, or it doesn't kind of stand still and stall. So that's why I think these are kind of difficult headings to work with, because as a writer, they don't give you that kind of purpose that you need to anyway. And like I said, I think this whole thing essentially turns out being chronological, because where you start with your introduction is you start with an issue or a problem or a something that has been unexplored or a phenomenon that's out there that merits some kind of research, right? So we've got this situation, this phenomenon that predates anything, right? It's the earliest thing. All of a sudden we have stem cell research, or we have how can we grow cells so that we can create insulin producing cells, we can create skin cells for burn victims. Well, we've got this issue, this context out here. There's something that has happened that we think needs to be addressed. Well, that predates any kind of research. Then you do your literature review. And what you do is you say, this is what we've done in the past, right? And then, but there's still this piece that's missing. That's you. Then you've got your methodology, your results, and then you've got, okay, this is what we've learned, right? And this is how it now gives implication, significance. It ties into, it advances the research that I talked about, right? And it adds to that conversation. And here's future work. Is that not chronology? It's here's what the issue was, here's everything that's been done, here's the present, right? Your methodology, your results, and then and your implications and your significance, and then here's what we're going to do in the future. This is pretty much straight chronology. It's tying all of these pieces together to show how you are adding to this research conversation. Does that make sense? And that's a very different perspective quite often from what you think of for either a lab report, hence my question about the lab reports. Does that make sense? I mean, because a lab report, you all know that your TA or your professor knows what you're going to give them, right? They're just double checking to make sure that you've got all the stuff there. And it's also very different from a research paper, because I don't think you all take a look at a research paper as being that kind of chronological development. I think you do a lot of, in my experience, and I've been here since dinosaurs roamed the earth, by the way. In my experience, as we have evolved, research papers still end up with a lot of summary and a lot of backtracking and a lot of difficulty in actually getting all of this expressed, because it's not the same thing as a journal article. This is pretty straight chronology. You are actually writing, and you've taken creative writing, so you're writing a narrative. You are telling a story. Now, this is not a fictional story. It's not. But you are telling a story. And you have to remember that. And I know that sounds strange, doesn't it, for me to throw that out to you. But you are. You're telling me the story of whatever the phenomenon is, whatever has happened, whatever it is you've done. That is a story. And it's very much a narration. And I should be able to follow what goes on, how this happens, what your thought process is. And if you lose that whole telling a story thought, you lose your reader, because then you aren't tying everything together well enough. Now, if I were writing, this is my recommendation, and I'm not your advisor, I am not the journal, I'm not anything. This is just me. But if you're looking at this from a writing perspective, I wouldn't write this first. I would write it last, because part of what's hard about writing, like I said, is the inertia. It's the getting started, and it is so overwhelming. And the longer you sit there staring at a blank computer screen, the more you start typing something in and then backtracking and then saying, that's not what I want to say, the more time you're spending just sitting there not getting anything very accomplished. And that can be very frustrating, right? It can be excruciatingly frustrating. And pretty soon we just kind of give up. And we kind of put something down. And ideally then you kind of move on. Well, see, I would start here if I were going to write something big and huge and major. Because, number one, a methodology is something that you've done yourself, right? I mean, you actually conducted this methodology, so you're intimately aware of the details. And you are keeping little engineering notebooks, right? Be very, very precise, be very, very detailed, be very organized and clear in what you put there, because you're going to have to come back and use that information. And the more detailed and the clearer and the better organized and the more little notes that you can give yourself so that you can go back and actually follow what you did, the better off you're going to be, right? The easier it is it's going to be to write anything. What happens is in the heat of the moment, we just start scribbling all over, and then we get tired, and then we think, oh yes, I'm going to remember this. How many times do you tell yourself, I'm going to remember this? And then you can't remember this, right? Yes, I mean, keep it very neat, very organized. As you can tell, I would